Welcome to the MBN Solutions Boss and Data podcast. This episode, our topic is Data Driven SME Success. Small to medium enterprises present a unique challenge for the data leader looking to build or lead a successful data function. Agility and innovation can often balance out the potential limitations around resources and infrastructure that some SME data leaders may experience. Experimentation, collaboration, a holistic vision, and careful nurturing of talent can often pay off for the data leader looking to punch above their weight in an SME environment. Joining me today to discuss the topic in more detail is a data leader who is an entrepreneurial, strategic thinker with a proven track record of delivering commercial value through the application of data, digital technology and analytics. He is passionate about data and its commercial application and supporting and nurturing data careers and culture. With over 25 years of CRM, data and analytics, strategic planning, marketing insight and market research services experience, he has worked for and with a range of agency and corporate organisations, including GfK, Forrester Research, Standard Life, Tesco Bank and currently Golden Charter, covering financial services and several consumer retail and electronic industries. Welcome to the show, Howard Barber. How are you, mate?
I'm good. Thank you, Rob, and thank you for inviting me.
No, mate, it's an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for freeing up the time to join me today. I'm really looking forward to this. This is a continuation of an ongoing conversation we have every now and again for the last decade or so.
If not a bit more, I think. But,
yeah, possibly. So as alluded to, Howard, you and I have known each other for quite some time, sir. But for the benefit of the audience, can you tell us your story? Where do you come from? What's been your journey in data to date? Where are you now? What do you do? All the good stuff.
Thank you, Rob. And you're making me feel old, so it's over 25 years experience. So yeah, I'm you can tell by my accent, I'm not from the Scottish Isles. I come from that London, North London. And I guess my journey with data really started at university. But it was more in the context of how we were using data and research to help with social policy and sort of political research.
Right.
That sort of led me into market research industry. I got a great deal of passion through my university days and decided to pursue a career in market research. And that took me into financial research and dealing with quite large data sets that were generated through survey means. But that really got me interested in how you use that information to help businesses, in this instance banks or insurance companies, to think about their customers, to think about their markets, and also to start to play out, in particular, marketing strategies and product strategies. And from there, I got more and more interested in how we can use research, sample and data together, databases, customer databases, which then led on to now a sort of a potted career through database marketing into more, I guess, broader set of skills around analysis and making use of larger data sets and building teams to exploit that and use that information. But generally from more of an agency side and helping businesses to take advantage of those things. It wasn't until I moved to Scotland that I then flipped and went on more of the corporate side and the company side, which I found deeply interesting because some of the frustrations being on the agency side have been that you'd deliver some projects or you'd make some incremental changes, but never see the whole thing through. So yeah, my opportunity came with a move to Standard Life, and there was given the opportunity to build out and to take them on a venture into more focus on the customer. I've been traditionally focused on advisor as being the sort of key customer in their marketplace, but they wanted to flip through changes in regulation, things like that, to focus much more on the customer. And then that gave me the opportunity to build quite a large team where we really worked together quite a lot to build that team and utilising different skill sets across a range of the data field to help us build that team out. And I moved to focusing on marketing technology and the use of data in marketing much more in Tesco Bank for a couple of years, and then moved and found an opportunity to move to Golden Charter, which was a step change from being in quite large corporates to a smaller organisation who nonetheless wanted to take advantage of the data resources that they had. But not knowing how to get there, and utilising someone of my sort of capabilities to bring in and drive that forward, which is where I've been ever since. So really a potted history through market research into sort of core data and analytics, and building data analysis teams and applying those through technology, largely speaking through communication technology or indeed through other means, whether it be different types of applications that could be used in a business to help with operational efficiency and things of that nature. So yeah.
Okay. And you mentioned there, obviously, we'd known each other before that, but I became a supplier to you at Standard Life, and that was a very, very large organisation. And we're here to talk about the contrast between those very large organisations and the smaller organisation, and how the data leader might be effective in those environments. For somebody like me who has no concept of what it's like to work in either type of organisation in the role that you have carried out, what are the major differences between large enterprises and smaller, medium-sized businesses when it comes to leveraging data for data decision-making and operational improvements?
I think there's the obvious ones, which you've got less people and more limited budgets, and then there's the other obvious ones, which is about scale, and the ability to use technology to really garner and harness data resources, and indeed the size of the data you're working with. But to be honest, many of the things that you would imagine would be a complete contrast actually aren't, and it really does depend on the context of the marketplace you're operating in, the products that you offer, and I think more importantly, the length of time that a business has been operating. Particularly in recent years, and sort of my field, the onset of fintechs, you can see they've got a direct advantage because of their size and because of the nature of the product that they're producing, that their ability to use and harness data is actually at the core of their business. So I would say it's not always that obvious, the contrast between smaller and larger organisations. But for organisations that have been in business for a number of years, not necessarily built that business around data and digital propositions, and often have the same issues that many large corporates have in terms of legacy systems being in place, often have built those legacy systems pre-cloud and pre sort of scaling technology that's affordable. And they've long established business operating processes, and people who've been working those business around the same processes. It's a great leap of faith in terms of investing in your data and being committed to that. Because I don't think it matters whether you're large or small, there's got to be a commitment to that data investment. And organisations that have had that legacy, I think, in my experience, has shown me it's a far greater ask to continue to invest in utilising data because of some of the challenges you face as a result. And then it expands into, well, if you're in markets and you have products that are being offered that maybe are less transactional in nature, or indeed you're reliant on producing your data through human input, largely speaking. So as customers come towards taking the products, they're inputting data, or the employees that are servicing those products, they're inputting the data through systems. That in itself brings up its own challenges through data integrity and quality and how things have been captured in the past, so that the environment that you come into with regards to the data can be challenged from the start because you've had that legacy. And often you have to think about how you can be pragmatic around the data resource that you have and the amount of investment and time you put into that to make it something that's going to really help the business. And therein lies, I think, some of the real differences between SMEs and larger corporates. I think dealing with the past can be tougher when investment in skills and capabilities to help you to find the value through the data, because you end up in a place where you're making a business case to drive these things out within the business, but often you're going to have to be very pragmatic about how you approach that business case, and lots of early wins and lots of being able to show the value that you bring quite early is where you might focus your efforts, and you have to focus your efforts. And often that comes as a compromise to maybe the longer term pieces and the foundational pieces that you might want to put in place. So yeah, there are some things. So I would say, if you're looking at the difference, the real difference comes through about how you go about building value in the organisation, delivering value, and being very pragmatic about how you do that. I think I had the benefit of utilising many of the skills that I've learned through dealing with larger corporates, and then just reapplying them in slightly different ways. But some of those still came with me. You really have to convince, your senior decision makers in the organisations to stick with this, but they need to be showing value as soon as you can. And therein lies, I think, some of the real challenges and the difference. There's multiple areas we could go on. There's recruitment and bringing in the talent and the differences.
And we will look at that. I think just from the points that you've made there, I think what I would suggest has become apparent there is that one of the major differences is the commercial aspect of the data leader's skill set, because you're not just talking about building a tech thing, because in order to get that commitment, to get that investment, to get the buy-in, to get the support, you're looking at the storytelling skills, the negotiation skills, the stakeholder management skills. So and I'm not asking you to say, well, you don't need them over here, but is that something that you've found you really have to have your A game on within that SME environment in terms of your commercial skills as a data leader?
Yeah, no, 100% on that. I mean, you may say at one level you've got fewer people to influence, right? Because you're a smaller business, and that does have its advantage. But nonetheless, as a data leader, you need to be thinking about how you're taking the organisation with you, and how you're giving reassurance and comfort to your senior members that the investments they're making are going to pay off. And that's where the pragmatism has to come. Because quite often in SMEs, you're going to be faced with investment cycles that are shorter, and they can pivot at any one point because the market dynamic might expose, the market you're operating might expose you to different challenges. So, particularly if you come with a background where you've got a legacy to almost re-engineer to be able to do the things you want to do with data, that longer-term investment piece is often challenged in the smaller organisation because of the nature of being in that business. So taking people with you, maybe then being pragmatic and looking at shorter-term milestones while you're looking at the longer-term picture, but really driving those things through. So you do have to be a storyteller and almost navigating through the journey and being comfortable in talking about that to audiences who are going to be less understanding of what that actually means. Is a vital part of the skill set, and I think that doesn't seem to say that it's different in larger corporates. I just think it's applied differently, and you have to think about the nature of the business much more than you would do in a larger corporate.
Okay, so drilling down a little bit on some of the issues, some of the challenges or the problems. So what are some of the common challenges or limitations that the SME might face when they're at the beginning of that journey, trying to implement a data-driven strategy in comparison to what you've witnessed yourself at larger counterparts? What are the challenges and how can they be overcome?
I think multiple challenges. One is I think interpreting why you've come to be. Why has this become a thing for the organisation?
Right.
Why is it important? And often it's because it's obvious to the organisation we should be doing these. But then how do you interpret that into the organisation to make sure that they're understanding from a, as we've just talked about, commercial value point of view and what it can do to help that? You're then into a situation where you're going to go, well, what have I got to work with, and what's the state of play? And often you have to really drill through that and drive through that as quickly as possible in order to be able to then build out the use cases that are going to support you in that journey. I think the other challenges are the fact that you don't. It's the budget and the being pragmatic around the budget. You don't have finite budgets to work with. And you have to look at who's in the organisation that can help you go on this journey.
So building alliances and building...
Yes, and even right down into who's got the skill sets that you might need that could be redeployed from what they're doing today into focusing in on the team that's going to drive this forward. You then need to be very pragmatic about how you approach recruitment in the market. You have to look at the options that are available to you. And often I think the first thing you need to do is work with the person who's got the most responsibility for people in that organisation. Now, I can accept not every SME is going to have a fully fledged HR department. But you need to get close to the person that's helping you with the people recruitment and work out your strategies. And in particular, embed at an early stage how you're going to look at this in the long term and building that team, but be able to do that and convince the audience that you need to convince, that you need to take a pragmatic approach to that. So, for example, I lent on really early doors apprenticeship opportunities. I looked at, in particular, graduate apprentices and how that's going to help develop skill set. I looked at a 1 to 3 year timeline on investment in certain skill sets. So, and I thought that would, and I still believe it was the right way to go, because you have to take the organisation with you on that, and to bring skill sets that are fully fledged and have been working in that sort of environment for many years can often lead to frustration if you bring them in and you're not quite there on the journey. So I looked at that and took a pragmatic approach to say we need to build as we go. So your people side is very important, and as I say, not just in terms of the team, but in terms of how you then tell that story through the organisation. I think then how you build and develop is important as well. So, and that in itself can be another part of the education journey. So embracing things like agile frameworks for development. They're new things often to smaller organisations, or stuff that hasn't been there for many years. So you have to bring that concept in. How do you advance from sort of the idea into delivery very quickly, and how do you instill into the organisation the sort of fail fast mentality and be acceptable of that? I found that really a really useful way in terms of building out confidence in terms of what you're doing. And I think, but you have to be pragmatic is probably the word that I would use. So you're often faced with challenges about how much of the data resource that you have in your organisation is going to be applicable, it's going to be usable, and how much time and effort you spend on fixing it, as opposed to just saying it's too much and we have to move on and look at other ways in which we can apply what we have there to dealing and delivering with use cases that are going to add value. There's a number of different things, but they're probably the most important thing I would drive out to any leader is about taking people with you and building those alliances in the organisation as you do.
And from the perspective of the leader going into this environment, and it's very, very common, and I've been involved in a load of these circumstances where the incoming leader has been asked to articulate their vision for the first 3-5 years, whatever it looks like. I think from what you're saying there, it's a case of having multiple plates spinning at all times, because you can't do C until you've done B, but you can't get B up and running until you've got A. And it's a case of trying to ensure that the organisation themselves may not see the end of the journey. You see it as the leader, you know what this will end up with, but it's about keeping those plates spinning as long as you can and bringing people along with you on the journey so that you can get to that final destination together. That's the skill.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So now we're going to get real down into the nitty gritty. So some examples, please. So you've obviously got a few wins under your belt. Could you provide some examples of some specific solutions or technologies that would work from that SME business environment? And how do they compare to the kind of kit or the kind of tech that you've used in the bigger place?
Actually, there's a lot of commonality. And I think the major advancement has been in utilising cloud technologies.
Right.
Because of the scale you can get at affordable prices. So I would say, in answer to your question, the first thing is utilising the cloud technology. It's certainly been vital in my experience, and I know through talking to peers, it most definitely is. Particularly when you've been with an organisation that's been around for a number of years and has clearly got
lots of data stuff.
Yes. And in order to bring those things together, You need something that's quickly scalable and powerful, and something you can rely on. But that's not to say it's just automatic that's going to happen and successfully. So you have to be, and sort of my learnings is you have to be really mindful that you need the right skill sets in there around cloud engineering,
Yes.
and the environments you build, and not to underplay that, because where we fall foul of that is just to make assumptions about how we set up our platform in terms of its consumption rates, even something silly as that, and then realizing that your consumption can really drive up the cost without you really realizing it, because you've not engineered it in the right way. And some of those things can spike on you fairly quickly and become something that your senior audiences become very aware of quite quickly, because those costs rack. So I would say 100% utilize cloud technology, be brave with that. I think most organizations are, but you've got to be brave with it because it's a step outside what has often been the norm.
But ensure that it's configured properly to stop that mission creep of rising costs over time.
Yes, exactly. I'd also think then there's a degree of pragmatism you have to take with the sort of technologies that you bring in, because at one side you're still thinking about, you have to still think about security, because not only you can't just rely on the cloud to do all your security work for and just assume that it's secure. And often the advantages that you have in an SME is that how the cloud technology has evolved is you've got lots of open source software and applications that have emerged and continue to emerge to help you do some very smart and clever things, but at obviously a fraction of the cost. And I'm very supportive in terms of my analysts being able to utilize those technologies to help them to experiment about how we do things. But I'm more comfortable with doing that when we're not trying to apply those technologies to the enterprise, and we're not trying to roll them out to the enterprise and being confined to a team. So, and it's been really useful in terms of the analysts that I've recruited, because they come out into environments where they've been used to open source technologies like R and Python and so on and so forth, and they utilize those things and they're comfortable with it. But where we've been pressing on, I guess, more established vendors over the years is how can you take the packages that you have and apply them to the SME markets so that they're accessible and affordable, but we're not having to start on a price point and it's gonna put the organisation off. And a lot of organisations are now embracing those things and packaging up their tool sets to allow smaller organisations to benefit from the power of the things that they've created. And where I'm more prone to do that is when I know that tool is going to be utilised enterprise-wide, and I need to lean on, I guess, the legacy of that organisation and how well those tools have been applied in the organisation. To give you an example, so Tableau, for example, we knew that was going to be utilised enterprise-wide because that was part of our strategy, was to put data in the hands of business people, and with that data that was robust and confident in its output. But I didn't want to rely on something that I hadn't tried and tested before in order to be able to do that. So we've lent on them about how we can create packages that are right for us, and in particular around data management tools and data governance tools. A lot of their price points and a lot of their history has been in with larger corporates utilising those skill sets, and their price points are very high. So we've been working with them to try and see how we can package up certain things so we can take advantage of certain pieces of tools at an advantage. So I guess to summarise, you're at a disadvantage because certainly when I was in the larger corporates, you could really rely on the relationships that well-established vendors had and really take advantage of cost efficiencies and driving that through. So you don't have that in the SME market, but what you do have is a market that's adapting and allowing you to take advantage of more established tools. Plus, you have to take, I get a bit of leap of faith about using open source tools, but be completely mindful of the fact you've got to think about security while you're doing it.
Yeah. So you'd mentioned grassroots talent, you mentioned the graduate apprenticeship. And I'm just thinking here, and the next question kind of looks at, so you've come from an agency background, a consultancy background, if you like, where you've been responsible for taking a package of work for a client and delivering it. What are the advantages and disadvantages of building your in-house team, having your own analytics in-house team, as opposed to just packaging up the problem and outsourcing it to an agency or a consultancy and saying, build that for me? So what's the advantages and disadvantages of building the in-house team versus outsourcing those tasks to vendors or consultants for the SME?
So from my perspective, I think the answer to that question is I would utilise both, but
right.
My preference, and I'll give you as to why it's my preference, is to build in-house. The reason being because that's the embodiment of the journey you're going on, and you're bringing the data skills into an organisation, and you're changing that organisation in terms of its.
So it's a cultural aspect.
So it's a cultural thing.
Yeah.
And what I found is bringing in contractors and bringing in outsiders for a period of time, that really helps you with speed. Particularly at certain points in your maturity, when you want to go to the next level. Say, for example, you want to go from the current use of data from an analytical treatment point of view to a much more advanced, predictive and prescriptive way. That's a good point to bring an outsider in to give you the advantage of their experience to help you maybe accelerate, or indeed you're trying to replace manual processes with more automated processes that are being fed by data. So it's picking and choosing the moments, but the in-house team for me is where you place the investment, you give the visibility, you ask the rest of the organisation to embrace that as well as embrace them, to some extent even bringing them into the team and developing them. Because for a smaller organisation, you're going to drive more value in the long term with having an in-house team. You've got some risk associated with that because you end up building, you've got to be mindful of key person dependency. You've got to be mindful of making sure that the skills and the knowledge that you're building as you're building out that in-house team doesn't become a silo.
But the playbooks are built and that it's transferred throughout the organisation.
And as I mentioned, it's taking the organisation with you, and that's a relationship building. And ultimately, you're building a data-driven culture. That's what you're responsible for, as much as it is the realisation that through the technology and data itself, you're building that culture. And having that in-house team, almost the evangelist for that, to help you support that through is absolutely valuable. More so in a smaller organisation than it is in a larger, where you can certainly support both aspects really well, because you've got the funding and the budget to be able to do that.
Okay. Now, you mentioned when you were talking about the configuration of the cloud earlier on, you mentioned security and privacy. And it's obviously a key question for a lot of SMEs, because everybody understands the risks that could come with a data breach and the reputational damage that could be caused by that. So how can small to medium-sized businesses ensure data security and privacy compliance while still being able to harness the potential of their data assets? Is there a strategy or a pathway they should be considering right from the start?
Yes, it should be part of the narrative that you start. At the start of your journey, you should have that absolutely upfront and being conscious of. And it's not.
So privacy by design philosophy right from the beginning.
And it's not about, because often it can be the negative that you apply to the positive that you're trying to do. So you've got to build that story, and you make sure it's your mission to drive the awareness of that as you're building that story. Almost become proponents of good practice. And in doing that, I think you have to build the strong relationships with your IT operations teams, who should be at the forefront of that. If there's an infra security lead in the organisation, it might not be, utilise them. Also, risk and compliance, utilise them in the organisation if they are there. If not, you have to build almost pseudo into those roles to help you to drive that forward. Make sure, it's just some really practical things. So access management, you have to be on top of that. So who's allowed to access the assets, and how are you managing just basics like password, multi-factor authentication, all of those different things? How are you managing that? Who's taking responsibility for that? Does that need to be in the team if you don't have it? And that's sort of someone who's got a mind on that and some experience in that. The other thing you must do is make sure your data backups and your ability to recover are in place.
Yeah, if it all falls over.
And they're tested, and make sure that they're tested so that you know that it happens. When it happens, you can recover from those things. Often these things don't get the attention that they do need because ultimately they're a cost.
Yes. Yeah.
But and you don't want to get to the scenario where you do suffer a breach or an attack and you realise that you didn't create the investment in this and then you're having to recover. Stay away from that. And the other thing, really simple things are like social engineering practices. That's often where security breaches happen. So get your organisation attuned to how to deal with those that are trying to get into your systems or trying to interrogate your environment and network. Get used to their practices and instill that into the organisation. It's often something we've, through the years, we've not placed enough attention on, I think. And as
you mean as data leaders or data professionals?
I think we're almost seen it as a sort of someone else's responsibility. But as you become more and more reliant on the data and resources that you're building out to drive business value, you're going to have to be mindful that they then become more open. Particularly as you're using cloud technologies, you might be utilising open source software to help you to mine that and access that. You've really got to be mindful of your security practices.
And I suppose it comes back to the point you made at the very beginning around that it's not a different set of skills, it's perhaps just a flex on some skills rather than on others. And in the role of an SME data leader, it would appear that there's more of a requirement to drive forward that data and privacy and security aspect. If in any way, in some ways just to provide an awareness of it throughout the organisation and ensure that it becomes inculcated rather than that's somebody else's job. Maybe in a larger organisation, you've got an InfoSec team that are looking after all that, or a CISO that's responsible for all that.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing. It's pragmatism because acceptance within your team that you can't be narrow in terms of the things that you're doing within that team. You have to broaden.
It's about breadth of skills. Yeah.
And I always look at it as that delivers you opportunities to grow in terms of your data career, and it should keep you in good stead as you're developing to have these skill sets in mind. But that places a large reliance on the leader to make sure that those skill sets are nurtured. And certainly, I mean, in the cybersecurity space at the moment, that industry is just flourishing from the point of view of careers. So it's as much as it's not like a selling job, but you're trying to embed into your staff that the breadth of the skills that you need as an individual working with data, you need to broaden them. Almost like we talked about the T shape.
Yeah, the T-shape thing. Yeah.
It's very much that.
And we've noticed that from an organisational perspective that the lines have become slightly. There's definitely an overlap, sometimes a blurring of lines between the classic responsibilities of a data leader and the responsibilities of a security leader, because we've been asked to have a look at some pretty high-end security stuff because there's been a huge AI ML data part embedded within the role. Yeah. So there is definitely a blurring of line over time. Going to kind of draw you back a little bit and then push forward, because one of the first things you spoke about was cloud and obviously scalability. And one of the first things that you would advise is embracing the magic of the cloud. But what are some of the differences in scalability of data solutions between small and large businesses? What considerations should the SME make or keep in mind when planning for future growth? When we've talked about the configuration elements, are there anything else that you should think about in terms of scalability?
I think it's in your narrative with the senior audiences that are giving your budget. So first and foremost, there's often a perception that the cloud's somehow cheap and free. It's actually quite amusing when you get into into those discussions, because clearly it's not. But what you do have is a difference between the volume and maybe the consumption rates that you will with a larger corp. It's just obvious. But what you don't have is a difference in the complexity necessarily. So that therefore places challenges on the engineers and the analysts in sort of making sense and applying data solutions to drive the value. They have to be mindful of how they're applying that through cloud technologies, so that we don't over engineer that then becomes more costly when it doesn't need to be. So that to me is where we firstly mentioned you need those sort of cloud engineering skills in to help you develop the architecture of what you're building, so that it is cost efficient, but doesn't detract away from the complexity that you will have, because the fact that you're dealing with, largely speaking, less data doesn't make any difference to the complexity of what you're trying to do. And I think in addition to that, small business owners have to think about, they want to utilize data, but they have to think about how they're doing that in the context of the consumer product that they're offering and what the experience that they're trying to drive out. And when you get to building out some of the use cases around that to improve the customer journey and so on and so forth, you do then have to think about, okay, am I going to literally make that happen in the context of my architectural setup? And then the scale and the complexity then comes into question straight away, because you're then supporting things that you've never done before through operating processes. So you have to take you have to take senior leaders on that journey, because there's less thought about the technology and the implications of the technology behind it. So it's your responsibility to make sure that the commercial case around that. But I think what the opportunity there, compared to even 10 years ago, Rob, to take advantage of that, it can't be underestimated. It really is a bit of a game changer for smaller businesses in that context.
And again, I'm hearing this emphasis on the breadth of skills for the data leader, and I think it would be a universal at any level. Some of the advantages of larger organisations might be, back to that T-shaped profile, there might be deeper knowledge in a specific area, but the requirement within the SME space is a breadth of knowledge across a number of areas that perhaps are not traditionally allied with the classic data leader. We've mentioned there about InfoSec, you've mentioned there about a lot of business and commercial knowledge. So these are key attributes that the SME data leader, if not has to have under their belt, but be willing to embrace.
Yes. Yeah, no, absolutely.
Okay. We're finishing post is in sight here, fella. Doing this all day, but unfortunately we've both got jobs to do. We've got 3 questions to go, and I think this one's probably the pick of the bunch. And you and I have spent quite a lot of time working together and collaborating on the nurturing and championing of talent, and I know it's a subject very, very close to your heart. What differences, in a general sense, have you observed between the way in which enterprise scale operations and SMEs deploy their data talent, and what advantages can be gained from operating in the SME environment from a talent perspective?
I think some of the things that obviously I've thought about around this question, when I've looked to try and make the distinction between large corporates and SMEs, that there's not necessarily a distinction, but I think the things that I think about that apply should be the smaller business data leaders should be taken on board. So for me, make it your mission to educate and work with those responsible for people in the organisation. I've already mentioned that. You must build close relationships, because quite often they don't really understand the skill set that you're after, or indeed how to get there.
Yes. And
there can be a reticence to use consultancies because of the pressure on budgets. And they're in the organisation to help to support that. So you have to work that through. Sometimes you need to make a case to bring a consultant because of the skill sets that you need, and how they go about applying those can end up being more efficient than if you're trying to do it yourself.
And I found And just on that pressure of budget, and you and I worked together very, very closely on Creative Data Academy for the DMA, and I'd worked very closely with Data Lab on their MSc placement. And what I found most surprising was the amount of people leaders within organisations who weren't aware that this was a route that could be used to grow and nurture talent that didn't have the budget constraints of the consultancy model. So sometimes it seems as if it's the data leader's job to almost be the evangelist. There are a number of ways we can crack this particular challenge.
Absolutely. And it gets back to the T shape, because you're then having to understand how to.
You're an HR guy as well as a data leader.
Exactly. And you and I know that there is a shortage of skills, and there still is. So you have to be pragmatic about how you work through that. The wage competition's intense, and it really, that can be exacerbated, and it has been exacerbated for me, but in your location and your local market. So you have to look at different ways to bring talent in. So as I say, longer term view, you build and you try and look at what you've got available to you, and persuade them to take on those careers within the organisation. Plus, you look at opportunities to bring those that want to learn and want to do that in such a way in which they're being exposed to as many things as possible. And then a smaller organisation can give you that because of that breadth that's needed. So embrace that. Look at all opportunities to recruit from apprenticeships. There's so many routes in there to even inward migration, and that becomes another challenge. Since Brexit, what I notice more and more is the availability of talent that's coming in from areas like India and Nigeria, particularly with almost a data bent in terms of the skill set. But that's another thing that you need to teach. So, well, how do I embrace that? How do I make sure I'm working with the government in terms of that? And I've got my mindset around how that I can take advantage of that and do all the necessary paperwork.
I mean, like right to work and visas and processing applications and
So in essence, just open yourself up to the opportunities that could exist. I think you have to, as an organisation, this can be a really difficult one with culture, is look at remote working. And what's happened since the pandemic, obviously we've a different way of working with it, but to embrace remote working fully, when you're a smaller organisation and you want to build that culture within the organisation, how do you make sure you can continue to do that while having embracing those that are not necessarily going to be in an office environment and be close to you on a constant basis? But you have to absolutely embrace remote working because of the competition that you face in your local area, and trying to get your best return on the investment you're making in terms of individuals.
On the remote working challenge, I fully agree, and I see it in another area that you and I have debated long and hard for a number of years here is diversity. And the pandemic taught us that remote working can work and can open up a talent stream for people who maybe had care commitments or weren't able to do the 9 to 5 in an office all the time. Yes, we can now remote work those people to work for organisations, but it does come, as you rightly say, with a challenge towards building the organisational culture. So there's a balancing act there again for the data leader. It's how do we get the balance right between accessing a talent stream that we previously couldn't access, but at the cost of perhaps losing a little bit of the hold of the culture that we would have had with the office-based 9 to 5.
Yeah, and being aware of neurodiversity, because and embracing that. And how do you embrace that? Because often for the organisation, it's a learning curve for them to go on. That you embrace that sort of approach to talent acquisition. So it's quite a mixed bag of working through things that are going to be advantageous to you, really. And don't lose sight of focusing on development, because I think development and investing in people is what an organisation can stand out on. So don't lose sight of that, and make that a core of your offer as you're trying to bring people into the organisation and taking them on their journey. So a range of different different skill sets required, again, in order to be able to take advantage of the sort of talent nurturing and development situation in a smaller organisation that might be already there in a larger corporate, and there's already been people responsible for within the organisation that you can rely on.
I'm thinking what I'm hearing loud and clear from you today, sir, is the eclectic, holistic view rather than a particularly narrow or siloed view of any of the challenges or aspects that you have to deal with as a data leader.
Yeah, it's almost, it really does become more acute in certain areas that you had got experience of as you'd worked through in a larger corporate, but it really come to the fore when you're in a smaller organisation.
Okay, second last question. It's time to get those future goggles on, Big H. So, and I'm thinking, we have probably been talking for the last 20 years, mate, but what do you see happening in the next 20 years?
We'll certainly still be talking. Continued. I mean, to me, it's just continued advancement. But maybe not to the point. I was reflecting on this, and I don't think we could do this without mentioning the two letters AI. And
I've got the bell out. Ding, 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 ding. We said AI.
No, exactly. But I think the advancement is clearly there, but not to the point where I think the machine does all the work, and the application of AI and related machine learning techniques, they do all the work. Data in this application in business will no doubt, it will pervade much wider and more broadly than it is today. But the human side of data analysis, engineering, storytelling through insights, is still going to remain a valuable skill. And as I hope you can tell from sort of my experience to date, it's going to be that's more acute in a smaller organisation, I think, that you continue to nurture that. All of the narrative and the noise and the excitement coming around things that are machine-led, and quite rightly so, but don't lose the human side, and I don't think you will. So, the other side of the coin, which is one we talked about, was about managing risk and mitigating security breaches. The more you rely on data to do the jobs, the more exposed you are to being succumbing to a security breach, and it's just going to become more and more acute. So make sure that becomes part of as you're thinking about as a data leader, that becomes part of your skill set and part of just who you are as a data leader. You're thinking about security and risk as much as you are about the advantages that you can take and the value you can drive through data-driven techniques.
Okay. We always conclude each episode of the show with a trip in the Wayback Machine. So, if you could talk to young Howard 20 years ago, mate, based on what you now know about data-driven SME success, what would you say?
That's a great question, and I spent some time.
Thank you.
And if you take it back 20 years, I think that would be the early 2000s. Would it not? Yes.
Very early 2000s.
And you know what I thought of when I thought about that? I thought there was this term, big data. And that came.
No, that was way before all that. No. It was advanced analytics that we're talking about.
Yeah. So I've reflected on. I don't think there's anything I wouldn't change or say to me 20 years ago to avoid necessarily, because I think it's through some of the mistakes you made that you created most of the learning that you've had. So
like to fail fast, you don't learn unless you failed.
Exactly. I would also say, and I know I was guilty of this, don't just think that the bigger organisation, the larger corporate, is where you're going to take most of or get most of advantage from a career in data. Because of I think you tend to overlook the value and the reward you can get from applying these skill sets and working within smaller organisations, and the reward that comes, I think, is far greater if you can make those achievements. You can create those achievements in the smaller organisation than it is in the large. So, I probably only piece of advice I would say is don't narrow your thinking. Keep it open, and look at experiences more so than just necessarily going for going for what seems obvious in terms of where the budgets are and your ability to be able to make a difference.
Brilliant, Howard. Thank you. Thanks so much, fella, for taking the time to speak to me today. Thank you for sharing your passion, your knowledge and your expertise on data-driven SME success.
Thank you, Rob.
You're welcome, mate. If somebody wanted to connect with you on LinkedIn, Howard Barber?
Yes.
Any other social media channels, any other ways of getting a hold of you? Are you out there in any other way, or is it just get you on LinkedIn?
LinkedIn probably the best way, yeah. Or I was going to say Twitter, but X these days. Yeah, they tend to be my channels.
Okay, I hope you, dear listener or viewer, have enjoyed the conversation as much as I have. And if you have, please take a moment to review the show on your podcast or video platform of choice and give us 5 stars, obviously, and share this episode with anyone you feel would benefit from a view or a listen. Thank you. And please do look out for the other episodes in this podcast series where I'm joined by other special guests discussing topics relevant to today's bosses in data. Visit www.mbnsolutions.com for resources like our UK Data Salary Survey, to watch recordings of our latest data meetup events, or to download our white papers, research and thought leadership. Follow us on LinkedIn, Instagram and Twitter for the latest news, views, opinions and, of course, hottest opportunities in the data space. Goodbye.